So thank you everyone, good evening, and welcome to the Brunier Art Museum. This is really great to see everyone here and a lot of students. It's been a while since we've been able to have so many people in one place, it feels like, so this is really fantastic. I'm Adrienne Jeanette, I'm the curator of the Brunier Art Museum, and I'm so happy that you're here, and that you're here to hear from, not me, but April Surgent, to talk about her amazing exhibition, Future Unfolding, and for her wonderful commission that is now part of our permanent collection, Outliving Glaciers, which is right there in the center, so you can go peek at it afterwards. I also want to say thank you so much to Jason D. Cogan, who the commission was made possible through his generous gift that was made in honor of his wife, Lori A. Jacobson. Jason, if you want to stand up and give a little queen wave. Lori was a great friend, and you can read more about her over there if you'd like afterwards too. Lori was a great friend and colleague of University Museums, and we're all honored that Jason has continued to support our work here at the museums and new acquisitions through her memory. It's really helped us to add some amazing works of art in glass specifically recently to the collection and to continue what we do. And we wouldn't be able to do any of this without donors and supporters like Jason and others. So I also want to thank the donors to the exhibition that include Marcia and Jim Burrell, Carol G., Lucinda and Dirk Skolton, Phyllis and Larry Lepke, and University Museums membership. And I'd also like to give a shout out, she's not here, but April can tell her, to Sarah Traver and Traver Gallery, who April works with and really helped make this commission possible in Seattle. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Christy Franz, Professor of Hydrology, Chair of the Department of Geological and Atmospheric Sciences, and the Smith Family Foundation Chair of in Geology. I want to thank her very much for partnering with University Museums for this lecture. This has been a really great and fruitful partnership for us, and we've had quite a few classes come in to hear from April and students, so that's been really fantastic. She teaches courses in surface water hydrology and has been investigating stream flow prediction for nearly 25 years with the goal of improving forecasting methods for more accurate, informative flood and water supply forecasts. Other recent work includes an interdisciplinary effort to foster interaction between stakeholders and researchers to support collaborative action towards improving climate resiliency. And under her chairship, they've started the Climate Science Degree Program, which has been a really great program for the university and also for this exhibition specifically. So I want to say thank you so much and welcome.
Good evening, everyone. It is my honor to introduce April Surgent. We're here tonight to celebrate her work in the commissioning of Outliving Glaciers, a new work of art by April that has become part of the University Museum's permanent collection. This is a wonderful opportunity to bring together students and faculty and community members to experience how art can inspire action and change for the environment and the world. April is a glass artist who employs the use of cameo engraving, which is an ancient technique that demands exceptional skill, ability, and patience. April's art is aimed at cultivating public awareness about climate change and anthropogenic impact on the environment. She draws inspiration from nature, but also uses her experiences of working with conservation research scientists to inform her work. In 2013, she worked at Palmer Station as a recipient of the National Science Foundation's Arctic Artists and Writers Program, and in 2016 was the first artist in residence with the Hawaiian monk seal research program. Most recently, April worked from the Farallon Islands National Wildlife Refuge, 30 miles west of San Francisco, and with Point Blue Conservation, and in Southwest Alaska with the US Geological Survey. In her art here tonight, we can see these wonderful places that she's been, but these places are also under threat. The commissioned work of art is of the Columbia Glacier, which for decades has been experiencing accelerated melting due to climate change. It is a perfect example of how April uses her art to draw attention to the environmental issues of our time. Please welcome April Surgent.
Well, I just want to start off by thanking everybody for coming out tonight. I don't actually think I've spoken to this many people at a lecture before, so I feel very honored that you all came out here. I have had just the most wonderful, if not just a little exhausting week here at ISU, but it's been really fabulous. So really, it's a privilege to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's especially sentimental for me to be here because actually my mother was born in Mason City. Her father was Norwegian. I'm sure that will surprise you. That's him here. Her mother was English, and they met in the war and ended up moving to Mason City, Iowa. So they're actually here in the audience, which makes it even more special. But just having this tie to Iowa made it, when I was first approached to have this exhibition here, I thought, oh, wow, what a neat connection to have a piece of my artwork in a place where my family is from. But I did not grow up in Iowa. I was born in Missoula, Montana, but my family, my parents are craftspeople, and they built a sailboat in Missoula, Montana, and of course there's not very much water there. So they, after the boat was built, they brought us, the family, myself and my brother, to Washington State, and I grew up around the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea, and really developed a love for the sea in my childhood. So the beginning of this lecture, I'm just going to give a little bit of history about myself, and then I'll dive into my research and my work, and then I'll end on the commission to give you a heads up on what's going on. So I recently found these images. They're from a local photographer, local to me photographer, Clausen Images. These are some beautiful aerial pictures that I think really represent where I live now and where I grew up. So I live on the Olympic Peninsula, and in the map, I am where the white X is in Port Townsend, but the blue X is where I grew up. So it's pretty close. It's only three hours away. In this upper picture here in the upper right, where that white X is, that's about where my studio is. You can see how close I am to the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and then even Vancouver, Canada. So I live in a very maritime environment, and very unlike Iowa. So I thought that I would show kind of where I'm from. So all of these pictures are from, are from the Olympic Peninsula. My interest in glass sparked when I was 14 years old. My mother and I took a girls' weekend up to Vancouver, Canada, and I saw some folks blowing glass, and I was absolutely mesmerized by the process. My parents got me some glass blowing lessons. Little did I know that Seattle was actually a glass mecca, and that was something I could do in Seattle and not just anywhere. But I had the access to glass blowing, and I really felt a strong connection to the medium. I blew glass all throughout high school, but I did end up going to art school. I studied for 1 year in Detroit at the College for Creative Studies, and then I ended up transferring to the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. I've always had a love for travel as well, and interest in different cultures, and just travel in general. So being able to study in Australia was very exciting for me. It was also where I really found my creative voice. I was blowing a lot of glass there, but this is a picture of their cold shop. There are many ways of working with glass. You have hot glass where you can blow it, and you have another way of working with glass, which is how I work, which is cold working, and that's the process of taking glass after it has been made and manipulating the surface of it with grinding tools. So these are some of the machines. This was actually the ANU cold shop, but this is my workshop at my home. But I wanted to show the two machines that I make most of my work on. So all of the glass that you're seeing in this exhibition is made on basically these two machines, or machines very similar to them. One is called the cutting lathe, and one's called the engraving lathe, and they're more or less the exact same thing, except the cutting lathe, you can put bigger wheels on, and the engraving lathe smaller wheels. This is a process where you're bringing glass up to the wheel and moving the glass around and to a spinning wheel. So it's much like drawing, but taking the paper to the pencil. In the case of the commission, actually, I was not able to lift those panels up. As you could see, I wouldn't be able to bring it up to the size machine. So I actually have a tool that I can bring to the glass, but it's the same grinding process, basically. So this was my very first cameo engraving. This is kind of a weird shot, the detail. I don't know where this ended up, so I can't take a better picture, but I just wanted to show kind of where I began. This was kind of my first discovery in carving through layers of glass. So what you're looking at is a sheet of about 1.5, 2 mil thick white glass over a sheet of green and over a sheet of red that I've carved through that white to reveal the underlying colors. So all of the glass engravings here, have started off all white, and then I've carved through that layer of white to reveal the underlying color. In 2003, I had an amazing opportunity to study with this gentleman. His name is Jiří Hartsuba. He was a Czech master engraver, and he is pretty much a self-proclaimed Johnny Appleseed of engraving. You probably haven't heard of engraving before because it is very much a dying craft and people don't practice it very much anymore. People that do practice it, many of them are students of Jiří's. He came from a background, well, first I'll explain a little bit of his work. He cut clear glass, so this is a piece that was maybe about this round and about an inch thick. And what you're looking at is the uncut surface, and you're looking through the glass to the cut surface. And so any of the brightest spots that you're seeing, like the arch of the nose or the forehead, are the actually deepest cuts in this glass. So that's what you're looking at. He liked to engrave portraits of people in a way that would capture their spirit as opposed to their likeness. And to understand why that's kind of a big deal, you kind of have to understand a little bit about the history of engraving. It's a very secretive craft. It's also a very traditional craft. So historically, it was used only for decorative items and high-end decorative items. That was in the manner that Jiří learned. This is a village in northern Bohemia, Czech Republic, called Harakov. This house in the bottom right is where Jiří grew up, and it's still standing to this day as a historical museum in the Czech Republic. So if you ever get there, you can actually visit his home and workshop. But he started engraving glass when he was 13 years old as an apprentice. And these were kind of the things that he was taught how to engrave. As he developed his work and in his career, he saw all of the glass engraving schools closing and nobody wanting to spend 5 years at an apprenticeship. So Jiří decided to make engraving accessible, and he taught that anybody can engrave. You just have to try and to make marks on the wheel. So these are just some examples of his work. This was the very first engraving that I made after that course with Jiří, and pretty much at that time I didn't pick up a glass-blowing pipe since that moment. I took that class, I went back to school, and I just started engraving and experimenting. At school, there was a lot of equipment and there were a lot of people who knew a lot of things, but there weren't really people who knew how to engrave. So I wrote to Jiří asking him all these questions about engraving, and very much to my surprise, he wrote me back. He did not give me any advice on engraving, but he did tell me, he talked to me about art and culture and poetry and all sorts of things. From that point, we developed a mentorship, and we We worked together for about 10 years before he passed in 2013, and we collaborated and moved on, carried on the tradition of engraving, which hopefully I can continue to also do. I think the reason that Jerzy was so important to me and a lot of other artists who studied under him is because he had a very kind of gentle spirit, and he always encouraged his students to not be afraid to try new things and to be uninhibited as far as and to be more childlike and not to worry about what other people were thinking or to worry about things while you're working. He just wanted people to explore and to be open with new processes, new ideas, and to always be learning, and that really stuck with me. After I graduated from University of Canberra, I moved back to Seattle, Washington. I had a studio in Seattle for about 7 years. This was the view out of the front of the building, and there was construction all the time. If you've been to Seattle recently, you would not recognize this area. But at that time, when I moved back, I had just been living in Australia for 4 years, and I was really starting to think about place and identity and how the places that we visit and the places that we kind of occupy really inform who we are and inform how our communities operate and how society in general operates. And so I became really interested in the kind of dichotomy between self-identity and place, of like where we're from, and how much where we're from really kind of impacts who we are. I started a series called the Reflection Series in about 2008, and that was when the financial crisis happened. I was kind of a very literal and metaphorical take on how we're connected to our environments. And then in 2010, I had the opportunity to make a piece for the Bellevue Arts Museum, which is a city just east of Seattle. And I made this piece called Into the Surface. You'll see the figure on the left, which is actually my self-portrait, which is here in the gallery on this far wall. Here you can see after the show. But this piece really talked about the anonymity that you feel that you can feel being in an urban environment. Here's a side shot of that piece. It was on an armature, which kind of had a curve to it. Some detail shot. As I was making that piece, when you're engraving, you have to wear an apron, you have to wear a respirator, and eye protection and ear protection. It's kind of a messy, loud process. And as I was working, I listened to a lot of things. And as I was making that huge engraving that I spent a year on, that big piece, I was listening to the news a lot, and I started to notice that people were talking about climate change a lot more than I had ever heard before. And when they were talking about climate change, they kept using these statistics that ended with like, by the year 2020, XXX is going to happen, and by the year 2050, this is going to happen. And I was thinking, like, wow, you know, I'm going to be 38 in 2020. What is that going to look like? And the more I started hearing the news, the more kind of anxious I got about the future, and I felt like maybe I was asking the wrong questions. So at that point, after that big commission, I decided to change my question and ask how we're impacting the environment as opposed to how the environment impacts us as humans. And that's how I found myself in Antarctica. In 2011, I applied to go to Antarctica through the National Science Foundation's Antarctic Artists and Writers Program. And it was a 2-year process, an incredibly rigorous application to get there. But I did end up getting it. I was there for about 8 weeks. And I had the privilege to go to Palmer Station, which is at the western Antarctic Peninsula. You can see the red dot there. So it's actually outside of the Antarctic Circle. I wanted to go there because it's considered to be an indicator ecosystem. It's a very fragile ecosystem that's very easily impacted by small changes in the environment. And also it was a very small station. There's only about 49 people that could live there. So I was really able to get integrated into the community. The station is right up there where the X is. When they built the station, the Anvers ice sheet was actually all the way up to the back of the station. This satellite image is actually 10 years old, but you can see how far the glacier has receded. It's even receded much further at this point. This is the station. When I went to Antarctica, so I have a full arts background. I have no science background. So when I went to Antarctica, it was really my first exposure to the sciences. I had really no concept of what research science actually meant. So when I went down there and I first was at the station and we had a lot of freedom to kind of walk around and explore, but I also had an opportunity to work alongside the wildlife biologists. So I got to work with the people studying the Adelie penguins and people collecting water samples and doing all sorts of different things. And it really opened my eyes to the parallels between the sciences and the arts. I felt like there was a lot of similarities where, the scientists are asking, they come up with a question, they go out into the environment, they collect their information, they come back to the lab and kind of digest what they've gathered. And same with myself as an artist. Not all artists work like this, but many do work like me, where it's a research-based practice where I go out into my environment, I collect information, and I come back to my studio. So when I was in Antarctica, it was kind of this aha moment of like, wow, this is very connected, a lot more connected than I thought as far as the two fields. And it inspired me to think about how I might be able to use these experiences more in my work. So I use a lot of photography to inform my work. I always take a digital camera with me. I always have also my sketchbooks and my diaries. I do a lot of reading, whatever I'm going to be studying. But I also take a lot of different types of photographs. So I use my digital camera, but I also use pinhole photography often. And so actually this is an image that I used to inspire an engraving in the back room called Sunset Sunrise. When I was in Antarctica, I was there for the austral summer, which means that it was light out 24 hours a day. So I have these long exposure pinhole cameras where I was able to track the sun through the sky. I'm not exactly sure how long this exposure was, but it was probably around 4 or 5 days. The cameras that I was using are super basic. These were just tins that I got from the kitchen. I brought a whole bunch of Altoid tins with me, photo negative paper, and some pinholes, and I set them up all around the station trying to capture the light. I had no idea what I would be capturing, and I didn't know until I came home either. But these were some of the exposures that I got. I felt just really fascinated with the ability to track light and time and all the kind of analogies that come with tracking those sorts of things. I could also play with the amount of apertures that I had. So this was a camera that had 2 apertures. You can see the sun tracks of the 2 images. How you develop these images is it's a photosensitive paper, but you can take that paper out of your light-tight container and you can put it on a scanner bed and you can scan that image and then it becomes a digital, you scan that paper and it becomes a digital image. Of course, when you're scanning an image, you're exposing it more with the light, so you're actually ruining that image, but it gets it onto a digital form where you can then print it. So I made a bunch of engravings based off of that work. For me, the reason why I use glass, aside from loving the technique of engraving and being drawn toward the material, glass is a very archival material, and it's something that can be around pretty much forever. It's not going to deteriorate, and very much looking at my work as being an archival record of this very rapidly changing moment in world history. So looking at our environments in a record-keeping kind of way. Then in the summer of 2015, I got a email from some folks that I had met in Antarctica. They had followed my work, and they said, "How would you like to get away for the summer?" And I thought, I don't know. But they invited me to work with a program called the Hawaiian Monk Seal Research Program. It's a program based out of Hawaii that's run by NOAA, and they study and try to conserve the Hawaiian monk seal population. They work on the main Hawaiian islands where people live and work, but they also work in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, which are much further out from the main Hawaiian Islands. These are the Hawaiian monk seals. The field camps that they have are very remote, and actually, I think, here's a picture of the field camp. So you can see the world globe where the map area is. That's actually past the main Hawaiian Islands, and that red circle is what that satellite image is. So that's called Pearl and Hermes Atoll. It's the top of a very ancient volcano, and it is now an atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's basically a watery landscape. It's 200,000 acres of coral reef habitat, but only 80 acres of land. So I ended up working with the Hawaiian Monk Seal Research Program for about 6 months, and 4.5 of those months were spent on Southeast Island, and we surveyed the other islands on that map for the monk seals. I'm just going to back up to this picture here. This was our camp. We had one kitchen tent, one office tent, and we each had a personal tent. But this is what our field camp looked like, and it took us about 10 days to get out there on a research vessel, and we had to bring everything we needed with us to this camp. So all of our food, all of our fresh water, any supplies that we might possibly need, we had to bring with us. If there were any emergencies, it was about a 7-day rescue. So we were very much in the middle of nowhere. This is kind of what it looked like. So we had a skiff. One person always had to stay at camp in case there was an emergency, while 2 people went around the atoll to find monk seals. So our job was to monitor them and check their health. So we had to count them and make sure that each one was accounted for, each individual was accounted for. The Hawaiian monk seals turn green from spending so much time out in the ocean. Every year they shed their fur, but when they're out in the ocean, they'll actually turn green. And so when they're on shore, they're very, very tired, and they get scared very easily. So we had to kind of like sneak around these seals and make sure that they didn't see us. If they did see us and we did disturb them, we did have to mark that down as a disturbance, and it went it was recorded because they're a very kind of sensitive animal. So if you ever go to Hawaii, please don't disturb the Hawaiian monk seal, which people do a lot. And here I am talking about disturbance. One of the things that we did was we had to tag the seals to get them into the database. So this was one of the tasks we were set up to do. One person had to sit on the seal while the other person had to try and tag the seal. They have a very thick skin in between their webbing, and it is very hard to get through some of that. We do that after the seals have weaned from their mother. One of the other things we did was to collect any samples that we needed. So this is a placenta that we found after a pup had been born. So we collected that placenta, we brought it back to camp, we dissected it, and then put it in a dewar, which is a tank that can preserve those types of things. We also had to do necropsies if we found any deceased animals. This one was a young pup that we found. If we had found an adult, we would have had to do the necropsy kind of add in wherever it was found. Luckily for us, this was small enough we could bring it back to camp and work on them there. So like I said, I take a lot of photos when I'm working, and I do use my digital camera a lot, but I also use another type of pinhole camera, which is different from the one I used in Antarctica, but has a much faster, it's a regular kind of film, so you can do faster exposures. And I brought about 100 rolls of film with me and took a lot of pictures. It's always a little risky to take film with you, of course, because you don't know what you're capturing and you can't exactly go back. So I definitely had my digital camera as backup, but I was really intrigued by the quality of images that I was getting from these pinhole cameras, so that I brought them. This was my personal tent. Everything was in buckets. We lived in a black-footed albatross colony, so there was a lot of noise, and they were pecking at us all the time, and it was kind of a dance through camp every day. I spent any free time that I had, I spent drawing or journaling or doing any sort of various project that I thought I might work on. There actually was not very much free time, but I did manage to do a drawing a day, so I came back with kind of a record of that. I always like to try and document as much as I can, because I never know what I'm going to be inspired by when I get back to the studio. Whatever I think I'm going to be inspired by, I'm definitely can guarantee it's going to go a different direction when I get home. One of the biggest battles we faced was the bird ticks. They were incredibly fierce because we're living in a bird colony, seabird colony. This was the foot of my poor field camp mate, Lainey. She was covered in oozing blood blisters the entire time we were there, and it was very, very painful for her. She got quite sick, but it was just something we had to adapt to, and we did, and we survived. This was our pit toilet. People ask a lot, like, what did you do? This was the pit toilet. You might think that the pit toilet or the ticks or not having like nice tasting water or the internet or Netflix was the hardest thing about being out there, but actually it was watching the wildlife on the incredible amount of garbage on these atolls. We're 1,300 miles in the middle of the ocean, and this is what it looks like. The animals were nesting in nets. They were often caught in them. We would have to disentangle them. You would find dead birds all over the place from ingesting all of the garbage. This guy was actually caught in this net. We had to take him out and cut him out of it. You can't really see in the picture here. It looks just kind of like a net and maybe a fishing float, but actually, like when you kind of look down, it was just incredible how much debris there was. You couldn't actually walk barefoot because there was so much debris there. After I'd heard about this, I had seen this on the news. I felt like I was really informed going there, but actually seeing it in real life was an altogether different experience. There's absolutely no way that a Google image or even an image like this can replace an actual experience of that, but it was a very difficult thing. Definitely by far the hardest part of being out there is seeing all of the debris. pretty much as fast as we could kind of pick it up out of the water or make it into piles, it was washing up. We collected on our island 5, they're called bagsters. They're about 5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet, me tall and wide. We filled those up with marine debris, and when we left the field camp, we drug them down to the dinghies, and then we brought that back to the research boats. Unfortunately, even with 5 of those big bags, you couldn't even tell that we had made a dent on the marine debris. So while we were there, one of the things I did is I noticed these disposable lighters. I'm going, okay, well, one thing I can do, I'll just let's see how many disposable lighters we can pick up. It was just kind of something cathartic to do, but also just noticing that if there was going to be one of something, there was going to be hundreds of it. So this is just an example of the lighters, but Lainey with the blisters on her feet, she had flip-flops and she couldn't wear those. And of course, we couldn't run out to the grocery store, wherever, shoe shop to get another pair of shoes for her, but we didn't have any problem because there were plenty of Crocs in her size to choose from on the beach, and she just walked around. So, if we needed things, oftentimes we were kind of pulling from the marine debris, but just to show you how much there is. So we collected a bunch of lighters, and I laid them out on the beach and photographed them. Later, I brought them back, and I made this first installation in 2017. These were all of the lighters that my field camp had collected. But then I was so intrigued by this, I was wondering about all of the other islands in the Papahanao. It's called the Papahanao-Mokuakea Marine National Monument, which is the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. It's a marine conservation area. But the Hawaiian Monk Seal Research Program, they go out every summer, so I've asked them to collect lighters for me, and that's where the other screen has, that's where the other screen has come from. This was another installation that I did with it, so I've kind of made a few different renditions of this installation. I really have to say I like it here a lot. Here's some close-ups, but of course you can see it after the lecture. But you can see here one says Parliament. You've got the cool frog. You've got something from maybe, I don't know what language that is, but it's not English. Maybe, does anyone know what that is? Those marks? What was that? Chinese, Mandarin. So there was some Russian ones. All over. If you spend some time looking at those, you'll find something that you recognize for sure. So when I was at Pearl and Hermes at the very end of the trip, I was kind of reflecting on what the biggest takeaway was for me. And I guess the biggest takeaway was that I really went there feeling like I was just a drop in the bucket, and that, what difference does my personal action feel like? I felt like I'm just a speck of dust in the universe, and nothing that I do is really that important. I felt like, what's the point? But after seeing all of the lighters, which are kind of a ubiquitous item, right, that everybody has used probably in this room at one point or another, right? I kind of felt like all of a sudden maybe my actions are more impactful than I think they are, because, who's to say that lighter's not mine, or who's to say that Croc wasn't mine, or that golf ball, or that potty trainer, or any number of you name it. It was on these islands, and I started to think about my impact and my individual impact in a very different way than I had ever thought about it before. I've used this analogy a couple of times this week, but thinking about being a drop in the bucket. I remember being a kid and hearing that analogy a lot. Oh, it's just a drop in the bucket. But I'm 41. I was born in 1982. The population has doubled. The world population has doubled since I was born. So I was born, there's about 4 billion people, and there's about 8 billion people now on the planet. And when you consider that we all need some of the same very basic things, all of a sudden, 1 times 8 billion is 8 billion. So when you're thinking of all these tiny actions, all of a sudden, maybe it makes a little bit more difference than you're able to think or reconcile as possible. And that leads me to the commission piece. So in 2018, I was introduced to this gentleman, John Pyatt. He is the lead of this program with this woman who's got her arm around me, Mayumi Aramitsu. They are leading a USGS research project that is focused on seabird and forage fish ecology. John is very interested in seabird die-offs, and Mayumi is very interested in forage fish ecology. And they've been working together to kind of understand what's going on with seabirds. This was actually a slide that I took from a presentation that John gave. But in 2015, from May 2015 to April 2016, 62,000 common murres were dying and coming to shore, and they couldn't figure out what was happening. It turned out that there was a heat wave. This is the common murre on the left. There was a heat wave that was impacting the forage fish. But seabirds are a really good way to tell what's going on from the ocean because they absolutely rely on the ocean for all of their nutrition. So if something's going wrong with the seabirds, we can be sure that something is going on in the ocean. Seabirds need to eat 30 to 50% of their body weight each day. So if they don't get that amount of nutrition in a day, they're dead within 2 or 3 days. So these are some of the forage fish that we were trawling for, and they looked pretty great. They thought, oh, these are looking okay, but they were bringing back some of these fish, and they were kind of noticing different things about them. So the makeup of the forage fish is starting to change, and some forage fish are very oily and full of a lot of nutrition, and some are not very nutritious, and they're more like lean cuisine. And they're finding that these fishes that are more like lean cuisine are kind of becoming more prolific than the hardier fish that are providing more nutrition for the seabirds. How we're getting those fish, we were trawling for them off of the research vessel. I was able to help with all of this work. And we were also, here's some more of the forage fish that we were sorting through. We were also collecting algae samples with a fine net, and we were also collecting CTD water samples, which stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth. So we were collecting data samples from different parts of the water table. So it was pretty incredible working with these folks. I got to work with them about 3 times on 3 different occasions for a couple of weeks each, and on the last occasion, we got to go to Columbia Glacier, which is the commission is based off of. Columbia Glacier is one of the largest tidewater glaciers in North America, and it is also one of the fastest moving glaciers as far as melting. Here's kind of the location of it. Again, I stole this from the internet. The map of A represents the map of Alaska, so that's in kind of the Gulf of Alaska. Prince William's, the PWS stands for Prince William Sound. It's a little bit closer up. And then where it says Heather Moraine is where the end of the glacier used to be. Here's a satellite image. You can pay attention to where this point here was the end of the glacier. And since 1980, it has receded about 12 miles. This image was taken in 2014. So where the boat was, where these pictures behind you were taken, we're actually kind of up in that area there. So you can imagine going up this fjord And on the charts, it shows, on the charts still, they show that it's a glacier. And when we were we were on the boat going up this fjord, I'm thinking like, wow, the charts are showing that we're on land, and we're not on land. We're where this melted glacier is. Just kind of looking at this is very dramatic, and here's the side by side, of course. Now this bottom image was taken in 2014, so that was 10 years ago. It's receded much further today. So it was a very visceral experience approaching the glacier, and here this is the approach. This is going into the fjord, and here you can kind of see the drag of the ice down the glacier, and where the ice used to be. So it's retreated about 12 miles and has lost about half of its volume. Here's another before and after picture from 2009 and 2015. I can tell you that it's very, especially after going to Antarctica and being in an environment like this and seeing like this warm kind of slushy ice is definitely a very powerful experience. When I decided to make this engraving, I did a lot of color tests, and I decided to use a warm white instead of a cool white to represent the ice because of a feeling of nostalgia. And I kind of knew that by the time I was done with this piece, even this part of the glacier would look very different than it did when I took that picture. So a lot of people ask me, like, what do we do? What do we do about climate change? And I've kind of convinced at this point that after all of the experiences that I've had and working with scientists, of course, I don't have a science background. I'm just kind of taking what I've learned from these experiences. But I have kind of come to the conclusion that the climate crisis is just as much an environmental crisis as it is a social crisis. Unfortunately, I think that we are so divided on this issue that we are not able to think clearly. It has been so politicized that it just becomes a blame game, and instead of focusing on the solutions, and we all just seem to kind of be relying on other people to find the solutions. I think at this point we know that it's happening. Whether you believe why it's happening or not is kind of, the rain and the wind and the fires don't really care what we think at all. That's a human concept, right, of thinking about things. So I'm hopeful that if we can create social change, we can create a sustainable future, and I think that would be the way forward. So I will leave you with a quote by Murray Bookchin, who is the founder of the philosophy of social ecology. But the assumption that what currently exists must necessarily exist is the acid that corrodes visionary thinking. That's it. Thank you very much.
Does anyone take a couple minutes for questions? If there's any questions, feel free.
Could you tell us in a little more detail how you actually made the commission?
Sure. I fused, it's a fusing and engraving, so I took each one of those 3 panels is made of 4 layers of glass. So I have a layer of white and then the underlying colors underneath, and then I carved through it with with a tool that's very much akin to a Dremel, a little bit different, and I also use kind of stone cutting tools to use it to carve the surface, but it's still very much in the same technique as I've done with all of my other engravings. So yeah, a reductive cameo process. So it goes, I went through all my photographs to try and figure out what I wanted to make, and then I came up with the composition. I spent a lot of time, I have a projector, not quite as nice at my home, but I projected it to the actual size I thought I might want to make it. I definitely figured out all the composition before I started working with glass, and I presented it to Lynette and Adrian, and I think maybe you, I don't know. Jason saw it, I think. Once it was approved, I started on it, and I worked on it for almost I would say a year, from kind of concept to finished product, or finished piece, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
That sort of matte surface, is that just the product of the engraving process, or is there another step that results in that?
Yeah, so after I'm done engraving, it often looks sandblasted, which actually on these windows, when you leave, you can see there's little sandblast etchings on there. It'll look a little dusty, but I can bring it back into the kiln and do what it's called a fire polish. So I bring out the shine a little bit. It's a little risky to do that because bringing glass up to a hot temperature and down again can crack the glass. So every time I put a piece in the kiln, I get a little bit nervous that the power is going to go out or the kiln is going to fail. It's known to happen, and I've definitely lost some work that way, but that's how I finish my work. Some people will hand polish the work, but this type of engraving doesn't really make sense to do that. Yeah?
This is a weird question, sorry, but I'm curious for you, does it feel very different to represent like landscape, water, ice, human beings, and animals in the glass?
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely feels very different. I worked with city-based imagery for a long time and then kind of moved into the landscape work, and definitely feels very different to approach. I think, I feel like there's so much more to learn about climate change, but I think at this point for me, I don't really need to travel as much anymore, and I have a kind of a desire to learn more about how climate change is impacting my local environment. Thinking about, as much as I want to travel, I'm thinking like, okay, I probably don't personally need to do this as much anymore. So, yeah, thinking about the different types of imagery definitely is a mind switch. I have to change my mind frame of what it's going to look like as a cityscape versus kind of a landscape. It's very different. Yeah.
How do you prepare? Do you have sketches, or do you have the image in front of you, or do you work free-handed?
Yeah, I prepare. It's very hard to mark out the glass too much because it is a reductive process. So I do have my inspirational material up on the wall while I'm working, and then I'll kind of mark out the glass, and then I'm marking the glass a lot, but I'm always working from photographs or drawings or a composite or something. So I try to, this process is very time consuming, and glass is very expensive. So I really like to work out the composition pretty close to what it's going to be out on paper before I actually start the engraving.
And can you make any corrections if it doesn't turn right?
No, that's the thing. There's no going back. You can't add to it. So in this case, part of why it takes me so long is because every mark is final, and you have to be certain that that's what you want to do. When you're doing a landscape, it's very forgiving. When you're doing a portrait, even the tiniest mark too deep will create what looks like a huge gouge in somebody's face. It's kind of incredible. So some imagery is definitely more forgiving than others. But there's no going back, and once a piece is broken, it's broken. I've had pieces break before where I've been tired. I've been in the studio too long, and I set something down and it falls and breaks. And even if it's just like a tiny chip, if there's a crack in it, it will run, and the whole piece goes into my permanent collection.
Can it be melted and reused?
I could be melted. I have not tried to reuse it. But I probably could. I tend to just kind of keep those things around as lessons learned. Yeah. Yeah.
I noticed in the exhibit when I came a week ago, and again on some of your screens, that you have rectangular images with small separations. Now my question is, are those saw cuts that you put in after you're done, or do you start with different blocks?
Yeah, so I start with, for the pieces that are made up of multiple panels, I start with, they start off as individual tiles. Yeah. And the purpose for that is that the machines that you saw at the very beginning, So I can bring a smaller panel up to the wheel, but like for the commission, though each one of those panels weighs 20 pounds, and you kind of have to move them around as you're working. So those I used a different tool for, but in general, I am bringing the panels up to the wheel. So if they're too big, I can't engrave them. So I cut the composition up basically into manageable size panels.
Where do you source the glass?
I source it from a company called Bullseye Glass. They're a hand rolled glass company out of Portland, Oregon, and they are kind of the kings of colored compatible glass. So glass has a lot of compatibility problems. If you melt, let's say, certain colors like a red and a yellow together, you can create a lot of stresses in the glass, and it can crack. But Bullseye Glass happens to be a very tested, high quality glass that they know every single one of their colors will work with every other one of their colors. And so I really like to use Bullseye Glass. Yerji used a lot of lead crystal. So clear lead crystal was what he used. Yeah, I've got two questions. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. So you're breaking the images into panels for technical reasons. How do you think that the meaning of the image or the overall aesthetics of the image change because you have to do that?
Yeah, it changes. It changes a lot. That's always kind of a battle with this process. Actually, I have been drawn to making larger panels and single panel pieces because I've just kind of been drawn to that because I found that the grid kind of breaks up the image, but it's just something that I kind of have to work out on paper before I bring it into the glass. And there are some images that I have wanted to engrave, but I haven't because of that issue of how it would break up how the image is read. But each kind of piece is different, and I can change the composition around. You had a question?
I wanted to know if you're spreading your knowledge now. Are you teaching others?
Yeah. Yes, I do teach a little bit. I'm definitely passing on Yerji's tradition. I'm not quite as prolific a teacher as he is, but definitely trying to pass on engraving and keep the tradition alive. Absolutely, yeah. There's no secrets. I have with the process. It's kind of technical. But it's very simple at the same time. Like it's really, this is the whole process. Like people feel like there's a lot of mystery behind it, but it's it's just a lot of time behind these grinding wheels and taking, one mark and one stroke off of the glass at a time. There's not a whole lot of mystery, but patience behind it. Yeah. Yeah.
For most artists, the budget comes along quite a bit later. How much does it cost to do this?
To make the engravings?
Like the entire process or the equipment even, if you buy it.
Yeah, so cold working is more affordable than other ways of working with glass, because once you kind of invest in the equipment, you have it for life, whereas like glass blowing, you have gas fees and things like that. So this lathe, I bought this 20 years ago, but this lathe cost, I think, about $8,000 right now. So it's expensive. It's not like something that you can kind of just jump into, which is why engraving is kind of this lost art. But you can engrave with a Dremel, and you can buy a Dremel off of the internet for $30. So it's also the same technique and way more accessible. So when I teach my classes, I'm very aware that hardly anybody has this equipment and they're not going to be able to get it. So I do teach a lot with Fordham's just because it's a very accessible way of working. The glass itself is quite expensive too, the material of glass, especially this handmade enrolled colored glass is very expensive. So I'm very, I'm not too precious with it, but I definitely want to make sure I have that composition figured out before I actually start engraving on the glass. So in material costs for each of one of those panels, I'm probably in $1,500 of materials for just that engraving. Any other questions? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.